I should be able to go in and it's a sidewalk. Who does our part of Ave Church?
I don't know who does it.
I think the guy across the street from Mo's, doesn't he? I don't know. I've never seen anybody plow it, so. It's always snow covered and it's done.
So how do you came in?
I know the guy that does the church before me, he does a really good job.
I'll let you know in a couple Yeah. But no, this is pretty much the same thing as I
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. That's better. We got some fun songs today. So, let's get on our feet. Let's sing some songs and praise God. Now try with all my actually had the opportunity to go to Round Lake last week and sing for some elementary school kids, and man, it was a lot of fun. And that was one of the songs we sang. So I hope you liked it. I had a lot of fun doing this song. We all do too as well. So this next one is also one that we did. And I'd say it's also a lot of fun. If that's redundant, but I hope you like it.
It was my
receiving, that we can fix our eyes on you in everything that we do. We thank you for your grace and your mercy and your outpouring of love every day, every second. In your holy and precious name, I ask all these things. Amen.
How's everybody doing after that snowstorm this week? Wow. I'm ready to move, to be honest with you. I have not shoveled so much snow in my life. Some people say, why don't you get a snowblower? Because I need exercise too. Like, it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. And then you get it all shoveled out. And the snowplows come out. And then you have to shovel ice for a while. It's hard work for those guys, so gotta appreciate what they do. Even though you're frustrated, I get it. I'm like, I can't believe they just came by. I just finished. And it's a good day. Hey, so we're in this series called Thrive. And what I want to talk about this morning is something I really think that we need to grasp. And it's a reality of something that God had established for us so that we can thrive. And in this whole message, in this whole thought process, one of the things that we're going to learn is the idea that God is for us. Like, He wants us to thrive. He wants us to be the very best us that we can possibly be. And I want to talk about something this morning. And when I read through the Bible, there are teachings that are in the Bible when I begin to study it, and I begin to look at it, and then I begin to look at the science that exists within our culture today. What it does for me is it teaches me, it makes me understand that God knew what He was talking about from the very beginning. And even through studies that are done in our culture today, we can begin to see that God is God. And so when we look at these studies and they're like, well, we got this brilliant idea because we've done all these studies. I love it when I say, well, God started that all the way back at the beginning. Because He knew. He knew that we needed something in order for us to thrive. And in Genesis chapter 2, going all the way back, Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, it says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all His work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. God rested. I believe in order for us to thrive, that we need to have this rhythm of rest. We have to understand that we need to enter into these moments of rest, just like God entered into. There's a rabbi that I read his book called The Sabbath several years ago. And this week I've been kind of looking at his life and kind of studying about who he is. His name is Abraham Joshua Heschel. He's a Jewish rabbi who escaped Nazi Germany. His sisters weren't so lucky. His mother died of a heart attack when the Germans knocked on her door. Like, his life has not been an easy life. Yet he was able to thrive. He eventually ended up in the United States and started teaching at the Jewish school outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, and eventually he went on to New York. That's where he kind of did a lot of his teaching as this rabbi. But Heschel was this interesting guy. When you study his life and you begin to look at him, there's some things that we can learn from him. And I really think he understood the Sabbath. He had this great understanding of who God is. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. at Selma. As they crossed the bridge, as they were going across on that third time, there's this famous picture of Martin Luther King Jr. with his arms locked with other people. If you look at that picture, Heschel is the second guy from the right, which I thought was kind of unique. Here you have this Jewish rabbi marching with Martin Luther King Jr. because he was all about the civil rights, and him and King began to have these great conversations and became these great friends. Heschel was the only rabbi that spoke at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral. He's a guy that thrived. He thrived in life. Even though his life was difficult, especially coming out of Germany, and even the life that he had when he lived here, being a part of that civil rights movement, his life was difficult. But he thrived. And I think that he thrived, or at least one of the reasons he thrived, was because of his understanding of what God had created on the seventh day. In his book, The Sabbath, here's the question that Heschel asked. He says, what was created on the seventh day? Now, we jump into that really quickly and say, well, nothing was created. That was the day that God rested. He rested from his creation. But Heschel says, he asked this question, well, what was created on the seventh day? And here was his answer. Tranquility, serenity, peace, and repose. God gave us something on the seventh day, is what Heschel would say. He gave us an understanding that we need to rest. What was created on that seventh day was a day of rest. And it was from God. And God did that from the very beginning. In Inc. magazine, INC, period, Incorporated magazine, there's an article that's called A Day of Rest, 12 Scientific Reasons It Works. Now, stick with me for a second, because God created this from the very beginning for us to have a day of rest. Heschel understood it as being a day of tranquility, serenity, peace, and repose. Now there's this article that comes out, 12 Scientific Reasons Why It Works. I'm not going to read all 12, but Rhett Power lays out 12 reasons that rest is important. Let me go over a few of them, because I think they're important for us to understand. The first one is it reduces stress. Anybody got stress in your life? I take that nervous laugh that you do. We all have these moments where our life gets kind of stressful. And when stress levels are high, we just don't function as well as we should. And in this article, it talks about that skipping breaks can lead to stress and exhaustion. Like, breaks are there for a reason. We should learn how to take breaks even throughout the day. We should learn to take breaks within our life. Because one of the 12 reasons rest is important is it reduces stress. If you want to reduce some stress, then you need to rest. Now listen, if you are married, you go home and being a husband, if your wife says, I need to do this, well, I need to rest because I'm stressed. Don't say Scott said, okay? Don't say that. Or turn it around. If you're a wife, don't say that. And if you're a student, don't say that to your parents. Don't say, well, Scott said I have to rest, so I'm going to rest because I have a stressful life. No. There's also that commandment for those of you who are students to obey your parents, right? And honor them. So it reduces stress. A second thing that the article talks about is getting away boosts your immune system. I didn't realize that. Getting away can boost your immune system. Like you'll be healthy, you'll fight off disease a lot quicker. Another one was completely divesting from work reduces inflammation and the risk of heart disease. It's good for your heart. You don't think God knew what he was talking about here? And it boosts your immune system, it's good for your heart to get away. He also points out that rest adds 10 years to your life, or adds years to your life. I delved into this a little bit deeper, and I started looking at this to see what kind of studies were done on this. And a guy by the name of Dan Buettner did research where people live longer than other people. And most of the people that live longer live outside the United States. But he did find one group within the United States that lives 10 years longer than everyone else. Seventh-day Adventists. If you're not familiar with Seventh-day Adventists, they're very legalistic when it comes to the Sabbath. Their worship is on Saturday. and they take a break from everything. When I was a youth basketball coach, I had a student that was on my team, and his family was Seventh-day Adventist, and they let me know up front they would not be at practice, nor would they be at a game on Saturday. Because they took it literal. To the point that it was very rigid, very strict constructionist mindset. They were doing it out of legalism and the law, rather than just trying to find tranquility and serenity and peace and repose. Because that's what the law does to us sometimes. We just do it for the sake of the law, but there was a benefit to it, right? They found out they lived 10 years longer than everybody else. The other thing the article points out is that resting restores your mental energy. Another article I look at in this mindset is by Bob Sullivan. And Bob Sullivan wrote an article called Memo to Work Martyrs. Long hours make you less productive. And in that, as they did their study, it points out that there was zero difference in productivity between workers who logged 70 hours and workers who logged 55 hours. There was virtually zero difference in their productivity. Because you need to rest. He points out that when you rest, you're more creative. When you rest, you improve short-term memory. And that was just from one article. I looked at Forbes also, and in January 15, 2021, there was an article in Forbes where they agreed with him, and they added, "Enhances decision-making and heals your body." A few restful techniques. The first one was practice. Be grateful for what you have. It goes back to earlier when we talked about thriving, right? We should not be negative people. And we should look at the positive and not always look at the negative. The article also said that you need to take deep breaths throughout the day. Here's what I want you to do right now. Take a deep breath. Don't you feel more relaxed? Like that's something that you can do to relieve some, or just rest for just a moment. Well, it says that we need to cultivate healthy habits, that we need to get adequate sleep. So God is right. God is always right. He gives us this spiritual discipline of rest. And when you go to the Ten Commandments, you know the Ten Commandments that God gave to Moses back in Exodus 20. You look at Exodus 20, verse 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy." Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. It's the only commandment that's a spiritual discipline. And it's the only commandment that says remember. Remember the Sabbath. Remember that day of rest. And keep it holy. Maybe it says remember because it's the one that we tend to neglect. Maybe we tend to neglect this spiritual discipline. Maybe we tend to neglect this idea of rest and just enjoying the presence of God. I know what happens. We get really busy and we think to ourselves, well, I don't have any time to rest because I'm so busy. If I had 25 hours in a day, maybe I could find that time to rest. But that's not what God expects of us. That's not what your body needs. That's not how God has designed you. He has designed you that you need to take a time of rest. And it's commanded that we remember this practice because it's beneficial for our well-being physically and our well-being spiritually. And sometimes I think we neglect this idea of rest. But I think it's so important in order for us to thrive. Because we need rest. So Jesus was always doing things on the Sabbath that the religious leaders would always confront him on. They didn't like some of the things that he did because they considered it work. Because once they took this idea of the Sabbath day rest, they had to figure out, had to design what rest meant. And so they had all these different laws as to what rest meant. And in this particular case, in Mark chapter 2, one of the laws of rest was you could not harvest on the Sabbath day. And I get that because a farmer, that's their job. I understand that. But as Jesus' disciples are walking through a grain field, they would just happen to walk by the grain and they would pull some of the grain off and they would crack it open and they would eat the grain. Well, the religious leaders got upset. And they confronted Jesus about it because they were working on the Sabbath. They weren't taking it literal. They weren't resting. And here's what Jesus said to them. Jesus says to the religious leaders, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Here's what Jesus is letting us know. He's letting us know that the Sabbath is not just a law to follow with a bunch of do's and don'ts. We don't need to sit back and try to figure out what work is and what work isn't. We have to remember what the goal of the Sabbath is. The goal of the Sabbath is to rest in the presence of God and understand who God is. Now, I know a lot of people, when it comes to gardening, like home gardeners, that's where they find rest. That's where they find tranquility. That's where they find peace. That's where they see the presence of God and what He's doing. And so there could be a time of rest for somebody from all the busyness that they're doing in their everyday life. That could be a time of rest. For a farmer, not so much. But for somebody else, man, that could be a time of rest. And Jesus says, look, the Sabbath was not created. You were not created for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was created for you. The Sabbath is beneficial. It's for us. It's for our benefit. God created it for our benefit. He didn't create it so that there could be a bunch of laws where we would be burdened by it. He created it so that we could free ourselves from the busyness of life. The Sabbath is for our benefit so we can find rest and restore our souls. Jesus, being the Lord of the Sabbath, wants us to find rest in Him. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, here's what Jesus says. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now think about what Jesus says here. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Have you ever gotten to the point where you're weary and burdened? Seriously. Some of you may be in a place now where you're weary and you're burdened. And Jesus says, you need to come to me and I'm going to give you rest. Like, come into my presence and rest and enjoy my presence within your life. And then he says, take my yoke, take my teaching upon you and learn from me. Learn from me. There were times that Jesus rested. He withdrew to be by himself in the presence of God. And if Jesus had that practice in his life, why wouldn't we? And why wouldn't Jesus have that practice in his life? Being God in the flesh, God's Son, it was God from the very beginning that did what on the seventh day? He rested. We need rest. And Jesus says, here, learn from me. Restore my soul. My teaching is easy and it shouldn't be a burden, but sometimes we've made this understanding of the Sabbath day rest as a burden rather than something where we're free. He never wanted the Sabbath, a day of rest, to be a burden. He wanted it to be a time to restore our soul. Wayne Mueller, in his book, Sabbath, puts it this way. The God who made the Sabbath is not a cranky schoolmaster, always forbidding, coercing obedience, and watching sniping subjects slinking about in cowardly compliance. That's not who God is. He goes on, he says, the Sabbath commandment comes from a wise teacher who does not like to see us suffer. That's the God I want to serve. A wise teacher doesn't want to see me suffer. That even within his teaching builds in a time of rest so I can experience Him and be in His presence, so I can find tranquility, so I can find peace. So I can get away from the world and just know who He is. We need rest in order to thrive. The commandment goes on and it says, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And the word holy means this, to set apart, to sanctify, to dedicate. So we ought to learn how to dedicate and set apart a period of time where we rest, where we experience the presence of God. Just like God did in Genesis 2:3, God set the seventh day apart and dedicated it as a time of rest. And so when God gives us the Ten Commandments, He is encouraging us. He's telling us to remember, to set aside some time to rest. Make it a holy time. A time that's set apart, it's sanctified, and it's dedicated to a time of rest. I have an opinion as to why this is one of the Ten Commandments. Well, my first opinion is that God knew that we needed rest. That's the first thing. And that's why He says, remember that we need it. But I also have an opinion that God wanted to establish this because the children of Israel weren't very good at resting in the presence of God. Now, I want you to think about it. The Israelites were always complaining, right? They were, we need more water. We don't like the manna. Did you bring us out in the wilderness to die? We are better off as slaves in Egypt. Those are the things that they kept saying to God. They didn't know how to rest. And going back to the first week, complaining is not a strategy. In order to thrive, we got to stop complaining. We got to learn to find peace in the presence of God. They never focused on the positive of what God was doing. And God was doing a whole lot in the life of the Israelites. He was doing a ton of stuff. They never focused on the positive. They never paused. They never rested to gain the wonder of God and enjoy the wonderful gift of life that God had given them. They never did. As I was reading more of Abraham Joshua Heschel, that rabbi I mentioned earlier, his understanding of the Sabbath is so encouraging because he took it out of a law to be obeyed and gave it meaning and purpose. He took it out of just a law to be obeyed. He gave it meaning and purpose. And in an article called Abraham Joshua Heschel on the wisdom and meaning of life, he's quoted as saying this: our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. To be spiritual is to be amazed. The higher goal of spiritual living is not to amass a wealth of information, but to face sacred moments. He's saying that we need to be amazed by who God is. We need to be amazed in taking these sacred moments. And I think about these sacred moments for me personally. And they don't often come when I'm working within my everyday schedule. Sometimes those sacred moments happen. But they mostly come when I'm resting. When I'm breaking away from my normal routine. When I'm sitting in the woods. When I'm traveling to places that get me away from the pressures of the world. Sometimes it's within those moments where I just take a break in the middle of the day and I'll walk outside around the parking lot. I'll go sit out on that bench that's at the back of the parking lot. Or sometimes it's going to the Family Life Center and shooting free throws. Sometimes it's just getting out of the office and working at Crimson Cup. Those are some of those moments where I face those sacred moments that Heschel was talking about. He goes on in an article, he says, gallantly, sedulously, quietly, man must fight for inner liberty to remain independent of the enslavement of the material world. And what Heschel is saying is when we don't take a time of rest, it's like we've been enslaved to the material world. And in order for us to have some freedom, in order for us to be independent, we have to take these breaks. We have to rest to free ourselves from the material world. The Israelites never rested in the presence of God. They never saw the amazement of God in their journey. How amazing do you think it would be to cross on the Red Sea on dry land with walls of water on each side of you? That'd be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? It'd be pretty cool. You would know that God was right there with you. And they would say, hey, we just need more water. We don't like the manna. Think about the amazement of the pillar of cloud that led them during the day, and the pillar of fire at night, leading their journey. That'd be pretty amazing, right? God's presence right there in front of us. Or how about in the middle of the desert from this rock, God brings forth water. Enough water so that all of Israel is not thirsty. Or in the middle of the desert, they find quail. Now, I don't know about you, but quail, it's not their natural habitat to be right in the middle of the desert. That's amazing to me. Or even going back, God freeing them from 7 days of work in Egypt. They never had a break. And when they were free from Egypt, when they were let go, they never really focused on that. All they focused on was, bring us out here to die. It would have been better for us to be back in Egypt. Really? Really? Where you didn't have the freedom to experience all that God is doing? We need rest in order to understand this. And that means breaking away from this. It's funny, I have it even written in here that I was going to hold up my cell phone. I forgot my cell phone this morning. This is mine. Ron brought it to me. And I almost turned around to get it because I thought that I needed it. Because when we forget our cell phone, well, actually it's a little computer that has a phone function on it and a camera function on it. When we forget this, we think that we can't get by, right? But it is somewhat freeing to be able to come here on a Sunday morning when I do get lots of texts. Sometimes people ask me questions of what's going on. I don't have my cell phone with me, so I don't have to worry about any of that. But these phones are destroying us from having some rest. We need to set them aside. One of the things within Judaism they do when they take their Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. And when they have their Shabbat meal, which is their Sabbath meal, as they come into the house in which they're going to have that meal, they have a Shabbat box, and one of the things they place in that box is their phone, and it's there for 24 hours. They literally take time to rest. And I think sometimes we need to do that. I'm not really good at that. I keep it beside me a lot of times, but man, it was so nice forgetting it today. Because what happens is I could be resting at home. I could be at the farm hunting. I could be on vacation. I could be walking around the church. And in those moments, those sacred moments, as I'm trying to rest, somebody will send me a text, and I'll look at it, and instantly I enter into some anxiety. Because I think I have to take care of it right now, right at this very moment. And I truly believe that this has done more harm in being able to find rest in our culture than maybe anything else right now. Now, I do think there's some positives for this. There are a lot of negatives. Well, one of the positives is being able to look back at stuff greatest moments of worship for me. Like, it's because it is a computer with a camera feature. I don't own a camera except it's on my phone. I'm able to flip through and I'm able to look at some things that just amaze me in those moments of rest. I can be sitting in a blind at the top of the hill above our house, turkey hunting, which is my opening screen. And it brings me peace and rest to see that every single day, to see that mountain in the background. And I'm able to capture some of those moments. And one of the most incredible times of worship that I've ever had on a Sunday morning was a Sunday morning that we got up really early, still dark outside. We headed to a train station. And as the sun began to rise, we began to make our way out of Anchorage, Alaska. And as we're making our way out of Anchorage, Alaska, we passed by a pod of beluga whales in the bay, which was absolutely amazing because I'd never seen beluga whales in the wild before. It was really cool. And after we passed through that, then we entered into the wilderness. And it was literally a time of rest because there was no service for this. Zero. But the camera function still worked. And as I stood on the back of the train, I'll show you a picture. I stand on the back of the train, and that's literally the back of the train. And as I stand back there and I'm just watching as that track we just continually go. I look at the mountains there, and it reminds me of mountains in my life, of times that I've had to climb over mountains that have been very difficult, or times that I've had to go around them. And on the back of the train, I began to see the amazement of God and what God is doing and what God has created for me to rest in His presence. It was so peaceful on the back of that train. And then we go through a tunnel. As we go through this tunnel, it reminds me that there are times that life is dark. And you have to focus on the light. You have to focus on the light and who God is, because He's always going to be present with you. And from the back of the train, I saw this river. And as I see this river, it reminds me that Jesus is the living water. Well, I'll thirst no more. And as difficult and stressful as life can be, He's always present. Because Jesus says, "Come to me, you who are burdened and weary, and I'll give you rest." My teachings aren't a burden to you. They're freeing for you. And this experience of rest came during, these experiences I showed you, standing on the back of the train, came during a time of rest. So every now and then I'll flip through my phone and I look at those pictures because it reminds me of who God is. And I love the time that I was on the train. It was a Sunday morning. There wasn't music. There wasn't a bunch of people. It was just me in the presence of God. And in that moment, I found that peace and that tranquility and that repose. I was away from all the hustle and all the bustle. God commands that we remember the Sabbath, that we keep it holy, that this is a time of rest because we need rest in order to thrive. And the Sabbath was made for me. The Sabbath was made for you, not you for the Sabbath. And it comes from a wise God who doesn't like for us to suffer, but He wants us to rest. And that wise God, His Son came and said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And when we do, when we meet God in those moments of rest, we can rejoice in the Lord always, as Paul tells the church of Philippians. And in Philippians 4, after he says that, you jump down to verse 7, it says, "A peace from God that transcends all understanding, which can guard your hearts." That's when I need rest. That's why you need rest. Because in order to thrive, we need rest. And people are looking for a peace that transcends all understanding. And it comes when we learn to rest in the presence of God. Experience those spiritual moments, those moments in which we are in awe of who God is and what God is doing. And it helps us focus on the positive things God is doing. And it lifts us up. And it restores our soul. And God knew what he was talking about when in the beginning he rested on the seventh day. And of the 10 Commandments, he gives us a spiritual discipline where we need to remember to rest so that we can experience the awe of God, the presence of God, and know who he is and know that he is for us. Because we're all looking for this peace that transcends all understanding, which can guard our heart. That's why we need to rest in order to thrive. I'm going to pray before we take the Lord's Supper. I just want you to, again, take a deep breath. Just take a deep breath. Think about all that God has done for you. And take this moment of being in the presence of God and other believers, and resting, participating in the Lord's Supper. Remember the sacrifice that Jesus has made for you. If you're far from God, you've never given your life to who Jesus is, and you need to make him Lord of your life, listen to the promise he gives. If you're weary, if you're burdened, come to him, and he will give you rest. Come to him and experience his presence. I encourage all of you to take a time of rest sometime this week. Just to take a break in the middle of what you're doing. Just to focus on who God is and what God is doing in your life. If you're far from God, you need to make a decision to follow him. Then reach out to me. Find me this morning. I'll be sitting right over here on this front pew for a little bit. And as we're singing the last song, you can come down and say, hey, I need to come into the presence of Jesus and find this rest. Because he's promised to give us that. And as we sang that song, Homecoming, he's promised to give us that for eternity. This time of rest is just something to experience here on earth before we rest in the presence of God for eternity. Can't wait for that homecoming. It's going to be great, isn't it? Where we sit in the presence of God and we're just in awe of all that he has done and all that he has created and how he is for us and not against us. And one of the things that God can do. Time of rest, not tranquility, peace, find rest for our soul. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for your words that you've given from the very beginning. Thank you for the command that you've given us, and Father, forgive us those times when we have not remembered to just rest in your presence and experience your all and experience all that you are. Father, thank you for those moments where we have been able to just find a peace that transcends all understanding, where you guard our hearts, where you protect us. Father, I just pray that you give us the courage to rest in your presence, to set down our phones for a period of time, to just set them down and take a walk, set them down and just rest before you. Turn off the television, just rest in silence. And just be grateful for the things that you bless us with. Father, we thank you for being a God that is for us, that's not against us, that blesses us. And Father, one of the ways you blessed us is you sent your Son to die and pay our penalty in sin. And Father, as we participate in the Lord's Supper this morning, we just come before you and acknowledge the eternal peace that you've promised us, with the fact that your Son was nailed on that old rugged cross, but the third day he rose again so we can experience you for eternity. Father, we thank you for that grace. We thank you for that mercy. We pray this in Jesus'